How did you feel when you heard you'd been suspended from the party?
Very shocked and very disappointed. I've been in the Labour Party all my life.
I think I failed in the shadow cabinet. I take responsibility for that, and I will do everything in my power as a deputy leader to change that.
For the first time in your life, you felt unsafe in Britain as a result of the Labour Party?
Yes. Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn hits back against the suspension from Labour, which came immediately after he disagreed with the report, which found the party had broken the Equality Act over its handling of anti-Semitism. As some of those close to Corbyn come out to support him, is he on course for a battle royal with Keir Starmer? Tonight, we devote the programme to asking what this means for Labour. Is it a defining moment in the future of the party? Good evening. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, pitted against Jeremy Corbyn, the man who until 6 months ago was in that role. Will this go down in history as one of the most critical days in the party, founded by Keir Hardie and now led by his namesake? The Equality and Human Rights Commission verdict into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is trenchant and damning. 3 breaches of the Equality Act, including acts of harassment. Findings accepted in full by Keir Starmer, but not by his predecessor Jeremy Corbyn, who today said the problem had been dramatically overstated. He was immediately suspended by Labour HQ and had the whip withdrawn. But the drama continued, with Corbyn countering, vowing to strongly contest what he called the political intervention to suspend him. So tonight we talked to the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, appointed to the shadow cabinet by Jeremy Corbyn, to senior Jewish politicians, a former senior advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, and to political commentators. Joining me now to reflect on today's ruling and what it does mean for the Labour Party is Observer journalist Sonia Sodha, the political commentator Steve Richards, and the left-wing Jewish activist and historian Barnaby Raine. Good evening to you all. Steve Richards, first of all. This has become about Jeremy Corbyn. Was Keir Starmer right to back a move to suspend him, if indeed he did actually back it and was involved in it? Was it the right move to suspend him?
I don't think it was in terms of leadership, for 2 reasons. It's been fascinating watching the programme and hearing, in fact, virtual total agreement by all the contributors that every dot and comma of this report needs to be implemented. And Keir Starmer's original statement this morning was a huge implicit rebuke of Jeremy Corbyn and the past leadership. Massive, ruthless, brutal. And yet the prism through which this is now seen is this drama, the current leader suspending the former leader, who is now a backbench MP with no influence on the leadership at the moment. The other thing is my heart sinks when I hear people talk about an exertion of strong leadership, because when that happened with Neil Kinnock, 80s, when he took on Militant, the newspapers hailing him. 2 years later, the same newspaper said he's leading a divided party and he spent too much time looking inwards. And there's always a danger that something that looks really robust and strong triggers things that, unfairly or not, then makes the same figure look weak.
Do you agree with that, Sonia?
I actually disagree with it. And I think, first of all, this had to be an ethical decision. So it didn't really matter what the politics of this decision were. Jeremy Corbyn came out and made a statement where he said that claims of anti-Semitism have been massively exaggerated for political reasons. He did exactly what the EHRC report said had been a massive problem in the Labour Party. So he did not leave the Labour Party with a choice. That was an ethical decision. However, I do disagree with Steve on what I think the political ramifications of this are. I actually think there are very few political downsides of this action for Labour. I think Labour has always actually been a divided party. It's an incredibly broad church. There has always been this trend with within Labour that there are elements of the far left who are incredibly unhappy with what they see as centre-left leaders who privilege getting into power over ideological purity. So this is a dynamic that has always existed in Labour. It will always continue to
warfare
exist.
can continue for a very long time in Labour.
It can, and Labour leaders have effectively dealt with this in the past. The Labour Party has taken the right moral decision, and I think it was also, I don't think those political ramifications are there.
But Barnaby, what about so many of, particularly younger people, who joined on the wave of the Corbyn mania that we saw a bit of there? Will essentially that be a fifth column in the party, or will a lot of people leave the party?
I have to say I find it extremely telling and depressing that we are already talking about the party mechanics of the Labour Party and not about anti-Semitism. You know, I've spent years writing and talking about anti-Semitism, which is a rising problem alongside rising racism more generally, and it's been impossible to have a serious discussion on this subject.
Well,
You've just had on as a
let's
credible...
have the question. Let me ask you the question then. Was Jeremy Corbyn right to say essentially that this report exaggerated the problem? Was he right to say that?
Well, he'd actually didn't say that. He said that he thinks that anti-Semitism is unacceptable. He thinks that it's a presence in the Labour Party. And he thinks that he just didn't say that the report exaggerated the problem. He said that some people in the media have exaggerated the problem. It's clearly the case. There was a Savation poll last year.
He demurred from the totality of the report. Barnaby, he demurred from the totality of the report.
It's just not right, I'm afraid. There was a Savation poll last year that found that most people in Britain think that about a third of Labour Party members have been disciplined for anti-Semitism. The real figure is about 0.3%. It's clear that while we have a Prime Minister in this country who wrote a novel about Sammy Katz, a cunning businessman with a proud nose and curly hair, there has been a political agenda to focus entirely on anti-Semitism on the left, in a deeply racist country with anti-Semitism overflowing across British society. And to point that out is simply a reasonable thing to say.
But the EHRC, Steve Richards, the ERCHC found failings. There is no doubt it found failings.
The EHRC found 2 people with legally actionable cases, one of whom is a councillor I've never heard of.
That does not mean he doesn't exist. That does not mean he doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't. But the EHRC found 2 people in a party of hundreds of thousands. I think anti-Semitism is unacceptable. I've been speaking about it for years. You just had on your programme as a credible commentator on bigotry Margaret Hodge, who was sent flowers by the BNP for saying migrants should go to the back of the queue for housing.
Let me just turn to Steve Richards.
When it comes to discussions of bigotry in this country.
Steve Richards, what happens next? You heard the lineup who are going to move in to make sure that Jeremy Corbyn is reinstated. Is this now going to be another long-running sore?
There is a real risk that that is the case, that instead of the focus that, again, in this discussion, in this slightly topsy-turvy way, is in complete agreement about dealing with and focusing on anti-Semitism, it becomes a soap opera about Starmer and Corbyn. What happens if Jeremy Corbyn is allowed back in? Is Starmer then weak? What happens if he's kicked out permanently? Does he get questions then about how dare he serve in a shadow cabinet of a leader who's been expelled? All of this, it seems to me, is an unnecessary. I gather it was a fairly quick decision made, as you described earlier, in a lunchtime sequence, but with consequences which I know many people today are tweeting, this is fantastic, Labour Party is back. I think it will lead to a soap opera. And I remember Neil Kinnock saying towards the end of his leadership, each week now the commentators want a shootout at the OK Corral. When you frame your leadership around, even if it was inadvertent and unintentional today, around taking on your party all the time, they will come back for more and more. I know I'm only focusing on the strategic leadership side of this, but that is a danger of what will follow now.
I think the people who are turning this into a soap opera, though, are the people who are speaking out in defence of Jeremy Corbyn's statement today. I think some of the questions that Steve poses, they would exist and be talked about regardless of what Keir Starmer's and the Labour Party's actions would have been today. So I don't think this is an incredibly serious report with very, very serious, weighty findings. There is absolutely no way that this issue is just going to go away. And I'm afraid that when a former leader of the Labour Party makes a statement like this, this is part of the problem in the Labour Party. Keir Starmer can't just ignore it and say, let's get on with implementing the recommendations of the report. Part of implementing the recommendations of the report is taking action against somebody who denies the full existence, the extent of anti-Semitism.
To Barnaby's point, though, if we're actually discussing anti-Semitism, we have heard and we know that synagogues are places that have to be guarded. You know, that social media is fused with hate and foul things towards both Jewish people that are in the public eye and Jewish people who are not. The fundamental thing is, if there is a disagreement at the top of Labour, do you think that Jewish people can actually feel safe?
I think that is a question for Jewish people, and I don't want to speak for Jewish people because I'm not Jewish myself, and I'm sure if you speak to Jewish people, and I think that's the important thing to take away from this report. There is still so much work for Labour to do. You cannot magic away a culture in a political party overnight. I'm sure lots of Jewish people will continue to feel unsafe because there is a lot of work.
Let me say, it is a very real thing, is it not, Barnaby? Day in, day out.
Yeah, it absolutely is. The evidence is extremely clear that anti-Semitism is on the rise across the world, including in Britain, across the political spectrum. For the first time in my life, we had a party leader, though, in Jeremy Corbyn, who thought it was simply and obviously unacceptable that some families starve in poverty in a wealthy country like Britain.
So,
a man who has been on the side of freedom from Chile to South Africa to Palestine, and his name was dragged through the mud. But the most disgraceful thing about it was that you used, the whole political class, used me, you used Jews, as your factional battering ram to destroy a man who wanted to educate children about the crimes of empire and then give them jobs and fund the NHS. That is unimaginably tragic. And I say that as someone who faces anti-Semitism, who fights anti-Semitism. The attempt to use it as a cynical, the attempt to turn Jews into a political plaything.
But I think the EHRC report is I think we have to leave it there, but also to say that that report was not a political report, it was anything but, of course, and that was the way that it was put together. So thank you.
To attack Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you all very much indeed. Quickly with the front pages now, I'm afraid. Daily Telegraph, shaming of Corbyn sparks Labour civil war. The Guardian, Labour plunged into crisis after Corbyn is suspended. The Daily Mail, RIP Corbyn's legacy of hate. And the Morning Star, anti-racist to his core, brought Corbyn to fight political suspension over fallout of anti-Semitism report. That's it for tonight. Tomorrow we will report from the US presidential campaign trail in the key state of Florida. But for now, from all of us, a very good night.